Her fiancé sent her to an old man's bed, but a CEO saved her and changed her fate forever. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome home to Mr. Peter Stories. Let me speak from the deepest part of my soul. I love you more than you'll ever understand. I carry your names, your presence, your love inside me like a heartbeat, but sometimes I ask myself, if I don't ask you to like, you won't like? If I don't beg you to comment, I am here, you won't show me your love? Why, my beautiful family, why do I have to ask for something that should come from the heart? It hurts, because I love you that much. Every word I share is soaked in devotion. Every story is built with your faces in my mind. You are not just viewers, you are my everything. I give you my heart freely. All I ask is to feel yours back. Please, if I live in your heart, if my voice brings you comfort, then show me. Comment, I am here, and like this video. Not because I said so, but because you want to. Let me feel the love I pour into you, pouring right back into me. Now take this prayer not just as words, but as a gift wrapped in tears and love. May joy flood your home like sunrise. May your heart be free from heaviness. May every dream you've buried rise again stronger. May your body feel rest, your mind feel calm, and your soul feel protected by something higher. And may you never forget, no matter how far or how silent you feel, you are still deeply loved, and someone prays for you every single day. Let's begin, not as strangers, but as one family, fierce and forever bound by love. The white dress whispered against Darcy Martin's smooth brown skin like a promise of happiness, as she smoothed it over her curves one final time. She had saved for 3 months to afford this elegant creation, sophisticated silk with delicate lace sleeves that transformed her into the princess she'd always dreamed of being. Tonight was meant to be perfect. Tonight, Joseph Mitchell, the man she'd loved for 2 passionate years and agreed to marry in a moment of pure joy 6 months ago, had promised her the surprise that would change their lives forever. You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart, her mother Grace had said when Darcy stopped by her parents' modest home before heading to the Grand Celestial Hotel. That man better appreciate what a treasure he has in you. Darcy's heart had fluttered with nervous excitement as she'd kissed her parents goodbye. He does, Mama. Joseph says tonight will change everything for us. He finally closed that big business deal he's been working on for months. Her father, Robert, had glanced up from his evening newspaper, his weathered hands folding the pages with practiced care. Just remember, baby girl, a man who truly loves you will protect your dignity. Above all else, never compromise it for his gain. At the time, Darcy had laughed and kissed his cheek. Daddy, you worry too much. Joseph loves me. He's going to propose properly tonight, with a better ring and everything. Now, standing in the marble-floored lobby of the city's most exclusive hotel, Darcy felt like she was living in a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the walls, and the soft melody of a piano drifted from the restaurant. She checked her reflection in the mirrored walls. Her natural hair was styled in elegant curls that framed her face. Her makeup was flawless, and the white dress made her look like she was already walking down the aisle. The elevator ride to the penthouse suite felt eternal. Her heart raced with anticipation as she imagined Joseph's surprise. Maybe he'd rented the entire suite for a romantic dinner. Maybe there would be rose petals and candles. Maybe he'd hired a photographer to capture the moment he got down on one knee again, this time with the ring of her dreams. Room 2847, the number Joseph had texted her with a message that had set her heart soaring. Tonight, my love, everything changes forever. You're going to witness me become the man you deserve. She knocked softly, her current engagement ring, modest but meaningful, catching the hallway light. The small diamond wasn't much, but it represented their dreams, their future, their love. At least, that's what she had believed with every fiber of her being. The door opened, but instead of Joseph's familiar face, she found herself staring at a man old enough to be her grandfather. Harold Whitman was tall and gaunt, with silver hair, slicked back and cold grey eyes that immediately made her skin crawl. He was wearing a silk bathrobe that barely covered his pale, wrinkled chest, and the predatory smile on his lips made her stomach turn. "Well, well," Harold said, his voice like gravel as his eyes travelled slowly, disgustingly down her body. "Joseph certainly knows how to pick them. Look at you. Absolutely exquisite. Come in, beautiful. We have the whole night ahead of us, and I intend to savor every moment." Darcy's blood turned to ice water in her veins. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I'm looking for Joseph Mitchell. He told me to meet him here for dinner." Harold's laugh was ugly, predatory, filled with dark promise. "Oh, there's no mistake, sweetheart. Joseph and I have a very specific arrangement. You're the centerpiece of our deal, my personal reward for investing $2 million in his pathetic little company." He reached for her arm with gnarled fingers. "Don't play innocent. Joseph explained everything to you, didn't he? You do what I want tonight, keep me company in all the ways that matter, and he gets his money. Everyone wins." The world tilted violently around Darcy, as if the earth had shifted off its axis. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest, and her vision blurred at the edges. "No," she whispered, then louder, her voice cracking with desperation. "No! This is insane! Joseph would never—" "Never what?" Harold stepped closer, and she could smell expensive whiskey and Cuban cigars on his breath, mixed with something else that made her want to vomit. "Never sell his pretty little fiancé to close a deal. Oh, my dear, naive girl. Men like Joseph do whatever it takes to get what they want. And what he wants is my money far more than he wants to protect your precious virtue." Harold's gnarled hand shot out like a striking serpent and seized her wrist with surprising force. "Now stop this ridiculous innocent act and come inside. I've been anticipating this moment all week. Joseph showed me your photographs, described your particular charms. I intend to thoroughly examine my investment. Let go of me." Darcy tried to pull away, panic rising in her throat like bile. In her struggle, the delicate lace sleeve of her beautiful white dress tore with a sickening sound, exposing her shoulder to the cold hallway air. "Feisty. I like that in my women," Harold leered, his grip tightening as bruises began to form under his fingers. "The more you fight, the more fun this will be. Joseph warned me you might resist at first, but he assured me you'd come around once you understood what was at stake." Something primal and fierce erupted inside Darcy, a survival instinct she didn't know she possessed. She drove her knee upward with all the strength in her body, connecting solidly with Harold's groin. His scream of pain echoed through the hallway as he doubled over, finally releasing her wrist. "You little bitch," he gasped, clutching himself. "You'll pay for that." But Darcy was already running, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor as she fled toward the elevators. Tears blurred her vision as the horrible truth crashed over her in devastating waves. Joseph. Her Joseph. The man who claimed to love her more than life itself, who had proposed on one knee with tears in his eyes, had sold her. Like property, like livestock at an auction. The elevator couldn't move fast enough. Her hands shook violently as she fumbled with her phone, calling Joseph's number with desperate fingers. "Baby, how's it going?" His voice was casual, cheerful, completely normal, as if he hadn't just destroyed her entire world. "Harold, treating you well? He's a bit rough around the edges, but his money spends just fine." "How could you?" The words came out as a broken sob that tore from her very soul. "How could you do this to me? How could you sell me like a piece of meat?" "Sell you? Darcy, you're being dramatic as usual. It's just one night. Harold's a lonely old man who needs some female companionship. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Just smile, laugh at his jokes, make him feel special." "You sold me!" she screamed into the phone, her voice echoing in the elevator. "You traded my body, my dignity, my soul for money. I secured our future. Joseph's voice hardened, revealing the cold calculation beneath his charming facade. This deal will make us rich, Darcy. We can have the wedding of your dreams, the house with the white picket fence, everything we've talked about. One night of sacrifice, and we're set for life. I would rather die than let that disgusting pig touch me. You're being ridiculous and selfish. Harold's harmless, just an old man with more money than he knows what to do with. Just have a drink with him. Let him feel like he's still attractive to a beautiful woman. That's all he really wants. Is your pride really worth more than our entire future? The elevator doors opened to the lobby, but Darcy barely saw the opulent surroundings through her tears. We're done, Joseph. The engagement is off. Don't ever call me again. Don't ever come near me again. Darcy, wait. She hung up and threw her phone into her purse, pushing through the hotel's revolving doors into the night. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke with violent intensity, and rain poured from the black sky like tears from heaven itself. Darcy stumbled down the sidewalk, her torn dress clinging to her body, her carefully styled hair becoming a soaked mess within seconds. Each raindrop felt like a physical blow, washing away her makeup, her dreams, her trust in love itself. She collapsed against a wrought iron lamppost, sliding down until she was sitting on the wet pavement. In her ruined white dress, the symbolism wasn't lost on her. She had dressed like a bride, full of hope and innocent love, only to discover that the man she planned to marry saw her as nothing more than a commodity to be traded. The rain continued to fall in torrents, and Darcy let it. She let it wash away her tears, her illusions, her faith in happily ever after. The cold seeped through her dress to her bones, but she welcomed it. The physical discomfort was nothing compared to the agony in her heart. She had never felt so alone, so broken, so utterly betrayed in her entire 25 years of life. The future she had dreamed of, white wedding dress, children with Joseph's eyes, growing old together, crumbled to dust around her. In one night, one horrible conversation, her entire world had collapsed, leaving her sitting in the rain with nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal and the terrible knowledge that the man she loved had never really loved her at all. Chapter 2. An Angel in the Storm. Michael Quinn emerged from the Grand Celestial Hotel feeling the familiar hollowness that accompanied even his most successful business victories. The merger he'd just concluded would generate $300 million in profit for his company, yet the triumph felt meaningless. At 33, he possessed everything wealth could provide. A penthouse overlooking the glittering city, an enviable collection of luxury vehicles, a private jet. Yet none of these acquisitions could fill the emptiness where his heart should be. The storm hit just as he reached the sidewalk, fat raindrops immediately darkening his charcoal Armani suit. He should have been rushing to his waiting Bentley, but something made him pause. Through the silver curtain of rainfall, he glimpsed something that stole his breath completely, a vision of white against the darkness of wet pavement. There, collapsed against a lamppost like a broken angel, was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Her dark skin glistened with rainwater, and her torn white dress clung to curves that would make grown men weep. But it wasn't her physical beauty that stopped him cold. It was the raw agony etched across her face, the way her shoulders shook, with sobs that seemed to come from her very soul. Without conscious thought, Michael found himself moving toward her, his expensive leather shoes splashing through puddles. As he got closer, he could see the damage more clearly. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her makeup had run in dark streaks down her cheeks, and her beautiful hair was plastered to her head by the relentless rain. She looked up as his shadow fell across her, and Michael felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Her eyes were the deepest brown he'd ever seen, like pools of melted chocolate, but they were filled with such pain and betrayal that it physically hurt him to look into them. Please, she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. Just leave me alone. But Michael couldn't walk away. Every instinct he possessed, business, personal, primal, screamed at him to protect this broken angel. Without hesitation, he shrugged out of his $5,000 suit jacket and knelt beside her, gently draping it over her bare shoulders. You're going to catch pneumonia out here, he said softly, his deep voice carrying a warmth that surprised even him. The jacket was enormous on her delicate frame, but it covered her torn dress and provided some protection from the storm. Darcy flinched at his touch, every muscle in her body tensing. "Don't touch me! Don't you dare touch me!" She tried to push the jacket away, but her hands were shaking too violently to be effective. "I'm not going to hurt you," Michael said, his voice as gentle as if he were speaking to a wounded animal. He held his hands up, palms visible, and slowly sat down on the wet pavement beside her, completely ruining his designer suit. "I'm not going anywhere, but I won't touch you if you don't want me to." "Why?" The word came out as a broken sob. "Why? Would you help me? What do you want from me?" The question hit Michael like a physical blow. What had happened to this woman to make her so afraid, so certain that every man wanted something from her? "I don't want anything," he said honestly. "I just can't leave you out here alone in the rain." They sat in silence for several minutes, the storm raging around them. Michael's suit was completely soaked. His expensive Italian leather shoes were ruined, and he was probably going to catch a cold, but he didn't care. Something about this woman called to him on a level he didn't understand. "He sold me," Darcy finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. "My fiancé. He sold me to some disgusting old man for money." Michael's hands clenched into fists, and he had to force himself to remain calm. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Darcy. Darcy Martin." "I'm Michael. Michael Quinn." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Darcy, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What that man did to you, both men, is not love. It's not even human. A real man, a man worthy of you, would die before he let anyone hurt you." Darcy turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time. Even soaked and disheveled, he was devastatingly handsome. His hair was dark and slightly wavy, now plastered to his head by the rain. His eyes were the most incredible shade of blue she'd ever seen, like the ocean on a sunny day, and they looked at her with genuine concern and something else she couldn't identify. "You don't even know me," she said, confusion replacing some of the pain in her voice. "I know enough," Michael replied firmly. "I know that you deserve better than what happened to you tonight. I know that whoever hurt you is a coward and a fool. And I know that you're the strongest person I've ever met for surviving whatever hell you just went through." A fresh wave of tears spilled down Darcy's cheeks. "I thought he loved me. I thought we were going to have a beautiful life together." "His loss," Michael said simply. "But that doesn't mean your story ends here. This is just a very painful chapter, not the whole book." Despite everything, Darcy felt the corners of her mouth twitch in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Are you always this philosophical with strangers you find crying in the rain?" "You're my first," Michael admitted, and something in his tone made her believe him. "Come on, let me take you home. You're soaked through and I'm worried about you." Darcy hesitated. Every logical part of her brain screamed not to trust another man, not after what Joseph had done. But there was something about Michael that felt different, safe somehow. Maybe it was the way he'd sat in the rain with her instead of demanding she go with him. Maybe it was the way he looked at her like she was precious, not property. "I don't know you," she said, but there was less fear in her voice now. "That's fair," Michael said, pulling out his phone and showing her the screen. "Here's my driver's license, my business card, and my mother's phone number. God rest her soul, but her voicemail is still active. You can call anyone you want to. Verify that I'm not some psychopath The gesture was so unexpected, so transparently honest, that Darcy found herself laughing despite everything. It was a broken, watery sound, but it was still laughter. "Okay," she said finally, "but I'm keeping your jacket hostage until you prove you're not a serial killer." Michael's smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Deal." He helped her to her feet, his hand warm and steady under her elbow. When she swayed slightly, he caught her other arm, steadying her with gentle strength. "My car is just around the corner," he said, pulling out his phone to text his driver. "Thomas will have the heat running and some blankets waiting." As they walked toward the sleek black Bentley, Darcy found herself studying Michael from the corner of her eye. He was tall, at least 6'3", with broad shoulders and the kind of confident posture that spoke of success and power. But he shortened his stride to match hers, kept his hand lightly on her elbow to steady her, and didn't pressure her to talk when the silence stretched between them. The car was warm and luxurious, with soft leather seats and the faint scent of expensive cologne. Michael climbed in after her, careful to leave space between them, and handed her a soft cashmere blanket. "Where to?" he asked gently. Darcy gave him her parents' address, then settled back into the heated seat. The warmth and the emotional exhaustion of the evening were catching up with her, and she felt her eyelids growing heavy. "Why are you doing this?" she asked sleepily. "You don't owe me anything." Michael was quiet for a long moment, watching the city lights blur past the window. "My mother used to say that we're all angels in disguise, just waiting for the right moment to reveal ourselves. Maybe tonight was my moment." Darcy studied his profile in the dim light of the car. There was something almost ethereal about him. The strong line of his jaw, the way his wet hair had dried into soft waves, the genuine kindness in his eyes when he looked at her. "Are you real?" she whispered, half convinced she was dreaming. Michael turned to meet her gaze, and for a moment the air between them seemed charged with electricity. "I'm real," he said softly, "and so is the fact that you're going to be okay. You're stronger than you know, Darcy Martin." When they reached her apartment building, Michael walked her to the door despite her protests. He waited while she found her keys, his presence a solid, reassuring warmth behind her. "Thank you," she said as she unlocked the door, "for everything. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Michael said, pulling a business card from his wallet. "But if you ever need anything at all, please call me. Day or night, doesn't matter." Darcy took the card, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent a jolt of warmth up her arm that had nothing to do with the temperature. "And should give you your jacket back," she said, starting to shrug out of the expensive garment. "Keep it," Michael said quickly. "It looks better on you anyway." As she disappeared into her building, Michael stood in the rain for a long moment, watching her apartment window until he saw a light come on. Only then did he return to his car, his mind filled with images of chocolate-brown eyes and a smile that had managed to break through even the deepest pain. He had no idea that his life had just changed forever, or that the broken angel he'd found in the storm would become the missing piece of his soul he'd been searching for his entire life. Chapter 3. The Fortress of the Heart. 3 weeks had elapsed since the night that obliterated Darcy Martin's world, yet the agony remained as fresh as an open wound. She sat curled in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, wrapped in Michael's expensive suit jacket over her. Pajamas. The jacket had become her shield against reality, the only thing that provided comfort anymore. It still carried his scent, something distinctly masculine and warm that reminded her of safety and genuine kindness. "Baby girl, you can't hide in here forever," her mother Grace said softly, entering with a steaming cup of chamomile tea. Grace Martin was a beautiful woman in her 50s, with the same warm brown eyes as her daughter and silver threading through her natural hair. She sat on the edge of the bed, her heart breaking as she watched her vibrant daughter reduced to a shadow of herself. "I'm not hiding, Mama," Darcy lied, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. "I'm just processing." Grace's weathered hands that had worked double shifts as a nurse to put food on the table, gently smoothed Darcy's hair. "You haven't painted in 3 weeks. You haven't eaten a full meal. You barely speak to us." "This isn't processing, sweetheart, this is drowning." Darcy's father, Robert, appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He was a quiet man, a mechanic who worked with his hands and spoke with his actions rather than words. But seeing his baby girl broken like this had awakened a rage in him that scared even himself. "I should have killed that bastard," Robert said quietly, his deep voice trembling with controlled fury. "I should have found Joseph Mitchell and shown him what happens to men who hurt my daughter." "Daddy." "No," Darcy whispered, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "It won't change anything. It won't make me feel whole again." "Then what will?" Grace asked desperately. "Tell us what to do, baby. Tell us how to help you heal." Darcy didn't have an answer. How could she explain that Joseph's betrayal had destroyed more than just their relationship? It had shattered her ability to trust, to believe in love, to see herself as anything more than a commodity to be traded. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Harold Whitman's predatory smile, felt his gnarled hands on her skin, heard Joseph's casual dismissal of her pain. The worst part was the voice in her head that whispered cruel lies. "Maybe you're not worth protecting. Maybe Joseph was right to trade you away. Maybe you're just fooling yourself if you think any man could truly love you." Across the city, Michael Quinn stood motionless in his penthouse office, gazing out at the urban landscape without truly seeing it. His assistant had departed an hour earlier, but he remained anchored to his desk, completely unable to concentrate on the contracts and reports demanding his attention. Every attempt to focus dissolved into memories of chocolate-brown eyes brimming with tears and a shattered angel in a torn white dress. He had thought about Darcy Martin every day for 3 weeks. He'd driven past her apartment building twice, not to stalk her, but just to... what? Make sure she was okay. Convince himself. She was real? He didn't even know anymore. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself, running his hands through his dark hair. He was Michael Quinn, CEO of a billion-dollar corporation. He didn't obsess over women, especially women he'd met for all of 30 minutes in the rain. But Darcy wasn't just any woman. There had been something about her, a light that shone even through her pain, a strength that had allowed her to survive betrayal that would have destroyed weaker people. She haunted his dreams and filled his waking thoughts with a persistence that both fascinated and terrified him. Michael pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the private investigator he sometimes used for business purposes. His finger hovered over the number for a long moment before he put the phone away. No, if Darcy wanted to find him, she had his number. He wouldn't violate her privacy by having her investigated, no matter how desperately he wanted to know if she was okay. Instead, he did something he'd never done before. He researched her art. A few discreet inquiries led him to a small gallery in the arts district where several of Darcy's paintings were displayed. The gallery owner, Maria Santos, was a kind woman in her 60s who spoke about Darcy with genuine affection. "She's incredibly talented," Maria said, leading Michael to a wall where 3 of Darcy's paintings hung. "But she's been struggling. Financially, I've been trying to help her get more exposure, but the art world can be challenging for young artists." Michael stood transfixed before the paintings. They were beautiful, vibrant landscapes that seemed to pulse with life and emotion. One showed a sunrise over a field of sunflowers, the golden light so realistic he could almost feel its warmth. Another depicted a storm over the ocean, the waves crashing with such power that he could hear the thunder. But it was the third painting that stole his breath completely. It was a portrait of a woman, standing. In the rain, her face turned up to the sky with an expression of absolute surrender. The woman's features were indistinct, but there was something in her posture, in the way the rain fell around her like tears, that spoke of profound loss and unexpected hope. "I'd like to buy them," Michael said quietly. "All of them." "All three?" Maria's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Quinn, these paintings are quite expensive for an unknown artist. The total would be $50,000. "I'll give you 75, Michael said without hesitation. "And I want you to do something for me. I want you to purchase every painting Darcy Martin has for sale, from every gallery, every online marketplace, everywhere. Money is no object." Maria stared at him in shock. That would be nearly $200,000 worth of art." "Then that's what I'll pay." Michael pulled out his checkbook and began writing. "But I want this kept completely confidential. She must never know I was involved." "May I ask why?" Maria said softly, studying Michael's face with shrewd eyes that had seen many types of collectors over the years. Michael paused, his pen hovering over the check. "Because she's extraordinary," he said finally. "And extraordinary people deserve to have their gifts recognized and valued." Back at her parents' house, Darcy was staring at her easel in the small sunroom that her father had converted into a makeshift studio. The blank canvas seemed to mock her, as white and empty as her future felt. She hadn't been able to paint since that night. Every time she picked up a brush, her hands shook, and images of Harold Whitman's leering face invaded her thoughts. Her phone rang, startling her from her dark reverie. It was Maria Santos from the gallery. "Darcy, sweetheart, I have the most incredible news." Maria's voice was practically vibrating with excitement. "Someone just bought your entire collection, every single painting I have, plus they want to purchase any other work you have available." Darcy's heart stopped. "What? That's impossible. Who would—" "I can't reveal the buyer's identity. They insisted on complete anonymity, but they paid asking price for everything without negotiation. Darcy, this is nearly $200,000. The phone slipped from Darcy's numb fingers, clattering onto the floor. $200,000? Her entire collection hadn't been worth more than $20,000 when she'd priced it. Someone had paid 10 times what her art was worth, and they wanted to remain anonymous. "Darcy? Darcy, are you there?" Maria's voice called from the dropped phone. With shaking hands, Darcy picked up the phone. "I'm here," she whispered. "Maria, this has to be some kind of mistake." "No mistake, sweetheart. The check is already cleared, but there's more. They want to commission new work from you. They're offering another $50,000 for 3 original pieces." Darcy sank onto her painting stool, her head spinning. This kind of money would change everything. She could move out of her parents' house, rent a proper studio, focus on her art without worrying about paying rent. But who would do this? And why? A terrible suspicion began growing in her mind. Joseph had wealthy friends, business associates who might feel guilty about what had happened. Or worse, what if Harold Whitman was behind this? What if this was his way of trying to buy her silence, or worse, trying to get her attention? The thought made her physically ill. She ran to the bathroom and barely made it before her empty stomach rebelled, heaving with dry sobs that came from deep in her chest. "Baby, what's wrong?" Grace rushed in, holding Darcy's hair back as she retched. "Someone bought my paintings," Darcy gasped between sobs. "All of them, for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mama, what if it's him? What if it's that monster trying to... Shh, shh," Grace murmured, rubbing soothing circles on her daughter's back. "We don't know anything yet. Let's not borrow trouble." But Darcy couldn't shake the fear that had wrapped around her heart like barbed wire. In the 3 weeks since, her world had collapsed. She had built walls around herself, thick, impenetrable barriers designed to keep out anyone who might hurt her again. The thought that someone might be trying to breach those walls, especially someone with sinister motives, terrified her more than being alone forever. That night, she stood at her bedroom window, clutching Michael's jacket to her chest and staring out at the city lights. Somewhere out there was a man who had shown her kindness when she needed it most. She had his business card, had looked at it 100 times, but had never found the courage to call. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe she was meant to be alone, to protect herself by never trusting anyone again. The alternative, opening her heart only to have it shattered once more, seemed impossible to survive. But as she traced the edges of Michael's business card with trembling fingers, she couldn't help wondering, was she protecting herself, or was she simply choosing a different kind of prison? Chapter 4. Gravity of the Heart. 2 weeks had passed since the mysterious art sale transformed her circumstances, and Darcy Martin finally found the courage to venture beyond her parents' protective walls for the first time since that devastating night. The substantial payment from her paintings had granted her an unexpected type of liberation, not merely financial but emotional. For the first time in over a month, she glimpsed the possibility of rebuilding her existence, even if she had to construct it in solitude. She still wore Michael's jacket everywhere she went, the expensive fabric now soft from constant wear. It had become her armor, her shield against the world. Today, she'd wrapped it around herself before heading to Morrison's Art Supply, the little shop where she'd bought her first set of paints as a teenager. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the familiar smell of turpentine and possibility filled her lungs. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of her old self, the artist who saw beauty in empty canvases and had dreams bigger than her small apartment. "Darcy," called Mrs. Morrison from behind the counter. "Haven't seen you in ages, dear. How are you holding up?" Before Darcy could answer, she heard a familiar voice from the back of the store. "Excuse me, do you have any canvases larger than 48 by 60? I'm looking for something really substantial." Her heart stopped. That voice, deep, warm, unmistakably kind, belonged to Michael Quinn. She turned slowly, and there he was, standing in front of the canvas display with his back to her. He looked different than she remembered, more casual in dark jeans and a navy sweater that hugged his broad shoulders, but no less devastating. Michael. The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. He turned at the sound of his name, and when their eyes met, Darcy felt like the world had shifted on its axis. His face lit up with a smile so genuine, so purely happy to see her, that it took her breath away. "Darcy," he said softly, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "How are you? You look—" His eyes traveled over her face, taking in the shadows under her eyes, the way she clutched his jacket around herself, the fragile way she held herself. "You look like you're healing." "I'm trying," she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "What are you doing here?" Michael glanced around the art store with a slightly embarrassed smile. "I was hoping to run into you, actually. I figured if you were painting again, you'd probably come here eventually." The admission should have alarmed her. After all, wasn't this exactly the kind of behavior she should be wary of? But there was something so genuine about the way he said it, so respectfully hopeful, that she found herself curious rather than afraid. "You've been looking for me?" she asked carefully. "Not stalking," Michael said quickly, reading the caution in her voice. "Just hoping. I've thought about you every day since that night, Darcy. I know that probably sounds crazy since we barely know each other, but I can't get you out of my mind." Darcy's heart began to race, but this time it wasn't entirely from fear. There was something else mixed in, a flutter of attraction, of possibility, that she thought had died with her trust in men. "I still have your jacket," she said, stating the obvious as she touched the lapels. "It looks good on you," Michael replied, his voice soft. "Better than it ever looked on me." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken words and barely acknowledged attraction. Other customers moved around them, but Darcy felt like they were alone in their own bubble of possibility. "Would you like to get coffee?" Michael asked gently. "There's a little place across the street. We could talk." Every instinct Darcy had developed since Joseph's betrayal screamed at her to say no, to run, to protect herself. But a smaller, braver voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, not all men were like Joseph. Maybe some were like the one who had sat with her in the rain and asked for nothing in return. "Okay," she heard herself say, "but I need to buy some supplies first." "Of course. Take your time." Michael stayed close but not crowding as she selected brushes and paints, occasionally making gentle observations about her choices. He didn't try to pay for her supplies or take over her decisions. He simply existed beside her, a steady, reassuring presence that made her feel safer than she had in weeks. The coffee shop across the street was small and intimate, with exposed brick walls and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans. They found a corner table away from the bustle, and Michael waited until she was seated before taking his own chair, small courtesies that Joseph had stopped showing her months before their engagement ended. "How have you been, really?" Michael asked once they had their drinks, a lavender latte for her, black coffee for him. Darcy wrapped her hands around her mug, using the warmth to steady herself. "Broken," she said honestly, "but maybe starting to heal. I've been staying with my parents, trying to figure out how to trust again." "Trust is precious," Michael said quietly. "Once it's broken, it's one of the hardest things to repair." "You sound like you speak from experience." Michael was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes distant. "My father left when I was 12, he said finally. "Just disappeared one day. Left my mother with medical bills she couldn't pay, and a son who kept waiting for him to come back and explain why we weren't worth staying for." Darcy felt her heart crack open a little at the pain in his voice. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrible." "It was. But it taught me something important, that the people we love deserve our protection, our loyalty, our presence. They deserve to know that we'll fight for them, not trade them away." His eyes met hers with startling intensity. "What Joseph did to you, it's unforgivable, Darcy. But please don't let his cowardice make you believe that's what love looks like." Tears pricked at her eyes. "How do you know what love looks like? Have you ever been in love?" Michael's smile was sad but beautiful. "I'm starting to learn." Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. "Michael," she began, but he held up a gentle hand. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said softly. "I just want you to know that there are men in this world who would consider it an honor to love you properly, who would protect what's precious instead of selling it, who would spend their whole lives trying to be worthy of your trust." The sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was something miraculous instead of damaged goods, made her chest tight with emotion she wasn't ready to name. They talked for 2 hours about art and books and dreams that had nothing to do with the pain they'd both experienced. Michael told her about his mother, who had taught him to see beauty in small things. Darcy shared stories about her parents, who had shown her what real love looked like, even when they had nothing else to give. As the afternoon faded into evening, Darcy realized she hadn't thought about Joseph or Harold Whitman once. For the first time in over a month, she had simply existed in the present moment, enjoying the company of someone who made her feel valued and safe. "I should get home," she said reluctantly, as the coffee shop began to fill with the dinner crowd. "My parents worry if I'm out too long." "Of course." Michael stood immediately, helping her with her coat in a gesture so natural and respectful that it made her heart ache. Darcy! She looked up at him, struck again by how handsome he was, not just physically, but in the way kindness radiated from him like light. "Would it be okay if I hope to see you again?" he asked carefully. "I won't seek you out if you don't want me to, but if our paths cross naturally—" "I'd like that," she admitted, surprising herself. Maybe we could meet for coffee. Again sometime, if you want to." Michael's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I'd want nothing more." As they walked toward the door, Darcy caught sight of their reflection in the window. A tall, devastatingly handsome man in an expensive sweater, walking beside a woman in paint-stained jeans and an oversized suit jacket. And somehow they looked like they belonged together. The thought should have terrified her, but instead it filled her with something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. Outside the coffee shop, Michael walked her to the bus stop, his hands clasped behind his back as if he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "Thank you," Darcy said as her bus approached, "for the coffee, for the conversation, for everything." "Thank you for giving me a chance," Michael replied. "Even a small one." As the bus pulled away, Darcy watched Michael through the window until he disappeared from view. Her reflection stared back at her, and for the first time in over a month, she didn't look like a victim. She looked like a woman who was beginning to remember that she was worthy of love. That night, she pulled out her easel for the first time since the betrayal and began to paint. The canvas filled with colors she thought she'd forgotten. Golds and blues and soft greens that spoke of new beginnings and tentative hope. And in the corner, almost hidden among the brushstrokes, she painted a pair of kind blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Chapter 5. Love's First Declaration. 6 transformative weeks had passed since that initial coffee date, and what had begun as tentative friendship had blossomed into something deeper, more precious than Darcy had ever dared to imagine. Michael had honored his promise about not pursuing her aggressively. Instead, their meetings possessed the beautiful spontaneity of destiny unfolding. A serendipitous encounter at the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, where he somehow always materialized just as she selected fresh flowers for her mother. Unexpected meetings at the downtown bookstore, where they discovered a shared passion for poetry and classic literature, finding themselves at the same park bench during lunch breaks, feeding ducks and discussing dreams that expanded with each shared conversation. Today was different. Today, Michael had actually asked her on a proper date, a picnic in the Rosewood Botanical Gardens during peak cherry blossom season. Darcy stood before her bedroom mirror, smoothing down the flowing sundress she'd chosen with trembling hands. The dress was soft yellow, like captured sunshine, and it made her dark skin glow with warmth. She still wore Michael's suit jacket when she was nervous, but today she'd left it hanging in her closet, a sign of how much braver she'd become. "You look absolutely radiant, baby girl," her mother Grace said from the doorway, her eyes bright with tears she was trying to hide. Over the past month and a half, she'd watched her daughter transform from a broken shell back into the vibrant, glowing woman she'd raised. And she knew exactly who was responsible for that miracle. "Do you think I'm making a mistake, Mama?" Darcy asked, touching the delicate gold necklace her grandmother had left her. "What if I'm not ready for this? What if I mess everything up?" Grace crossed the room and took her daughter's hands in her weathered ones. "Sweetheart, I've watched that man look at you like you hung the moon and stars in the sky. I've seen how gentle he is with you, how patient. A man like that doesn't come along every day." "But what if nothing?" Grace interrupted firmly. "Darcy Marie Martin, you listen to me. That Joseph character tried to destroy your spirit, but he failed. You are worthy of love, real, honest, beautiful love. And if I'm not mistaken, that's exactly what Michael Quinn is offering you." Darcy's father, Robert, appeared behind Grace. his tall frame filling the doorway. "Baby girl," he said in his deep, quiet voice, "I've lived 58 years on this earth, and I know a good man when I see one. That boy looks at you the way I still look at your mother after 35 years of marriage. Don't let fear rob you of happiness." 20 minutes later, Darcy found herself walking through the entrance of Rosewood Botanical Gardens, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The gardens were in full bloom, with cherry blossom trees creating pink and white canopies overhead, and the air thick with the perfume of hundreds of different flowers. She spotted Michael before he saw her, and her breath caught in her throat. He was standing beneath a particularly spectacular cherry tree, wearing dark jeans and a soft grey Henley that hugged his broad chest perfectly. His dark hair caught the dappled sunlight filtering through the blossoms, and when he turned and saw her approaching, his face lit up with a smile so brilliant it could have powered the entire city. "Darcy," he breathed, his voice thick with something that made her pulse quicken. "You look... God, you're so beautiful it actually hurts to look at you." She felt heat rise in her cheeks at the raw honesty in his voice. "You clean up pretty well. Yourself, Mr. Quinn." He'd prepared everything perfectly, a vintage quilt spread beneath the cherry tree, a wicker basket filled with her favorite foods that he'd somehow learned she loved, and mason jars filled with fresh lemonade. But it was the small details that made her heart swell. The way he'd remembered she preferred strawberries to grapes, how he'd brought the poetry book they'd discussed at the bookstore, the single yellow rose lying across her napkin that matched her dress perfectly. "Michael, it's perfect," she whispered, settling onto the quilt beside him. "You deserve perfect," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. They spent hours talking and laughing, sharing childhood memories and dreams for the future. Michael told her about the children's hospital, where he volunteered, reading stories to sick kids who reminded him why success meant nothing without someone to share it with. Darcy described her vision of opening an art studio where she could teach underprivileged children to express themselves through painting. "You have such a beautiful heart," Michael said softly, watching her face light up as she talked about her dreams. "The way you see the world, the way you want to give back even after everything you've been through, it's extraordinary." "I'm not extraordinary," Darcy protested, suddenly shy under the intensity of his gaze. "You are to me," he said quietly. "You're the most extraordinary person I've ever met." As the afternoon melted into early evening, the sky painted itself in shades of pink and gold that rivaled the cherry blossoms above them. Other couples and families had long since departed, leaving them alone in their private paradise of flowers and fading light. Michael had been quieter for the past hour, and Darcy could sense something building between them, an electricity that made the air itself seem to shimmer with possibility. When she looked at him, she found him studying her face with an expression so tender, so full of longing, that her breath caught in her throat. "Darcy," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I can't keep inside anymore." Her heart began to race, equal parts terror and anticipation flooding her system. "What is it?" Michael shifted on the quilt until he was facing her fully, taking her hands in his larger ones. His touch was warm and steady, anchoring her in the moment even as her world began to tilt on its axis. "I'm in love with you," he said quietly, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "Completely, desperately, hopelessly in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you in the rain, but now you're the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thought in my head before I fall asleep. You're in every breath I take, every beat of my heart." Darcy felt like she couldn't breathe. No one had ever spoken to her like this. With such raw honesty, such vulnerable truth. Joseph had told her he loved her, but it had never felt like this. This felt like standing in the path of a hurricane, beautiful and terrifying and completely overwhelming. "Michael, I know you're not ready to hear this, he continued, his thumbs stroking gently over her knuckles. I know you're still healing, still learning to trust again, but I needed you to know how I feel. I needed you to understand that what's growing between us, it's real, Darcy. It's the most real thing I've ever experienced. Panic began to claw at her chest, all her old fears, rising like a tide, threatening to drown her. This was too much, too fast, too intense. How could he love her when he barely knew her? How could she trust these feelings when the last man who'd claimed to love her had sold her like property? You don't know me, she whispered, pulling her hands from his and wrapping her arms around herself protectively. You don't know what I'm really like. You just think you love me because I was broken and you helped me. It's not real love. It's just pity. The pain that flashed across Michael's face was so acute that it made her stomach clench with guilt. But she couldn't stop the words from pouring out, all her fears and insecurities spilling forth like poison from an infected wound. You think you want me now, but what happens when you realize I'm just ordinary, just some damaged girl with trust issues and a past that's too messy for someone like you? You'll get bored, or you'll find someone better, someone who isn't broken. Inside, stop, Michael said firmly, his voice cutting through her spiral of self-doubt. Don't you dare talk about yourself like that. Don't let his poison become your truth. It is the truth, Darcy cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. Joseph showed me exactly what I'm worth, exactly how easy it is to throw me away when something better comes along. Joseph was a coward and a fool, Michael said fiercely, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He threw away the most precious gift he could ever have been given, and his loss doesn't define your worth. How can you be so sure? She sobbed. How can you love someone you barely know? Michael's expression softened, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but unwavering. Because I see you, Darcy. I see your strength, your talent, your beautiful heart that still chooses kindness, even after being broken. I see the way you light up when you talk about your art, the way you worry about stray cats, the way you love your parents so fiercely that you moved back home just to heal, surrounded by their love. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her face in his hands with infinite tenderness. I love you because you're brave enough to trust again, even when you're terrified. I love you because you see beauty in broken things and believe they can be made whole. I love you because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to hope. For a moment, Darcy felt herself wavering on the edge of believing him, of taking the leap into the terrifying, beautiful unknown of loving him back. But then Joseph's voice echoed in her memory. You're being dramatic. It's just one night. And the walls she'd built around her heart slammed back into place. I can't, she whispered, scrambling to her feet. I'm sorry, Michael, but I can't do this. I'm not ready. I may never be ready. She turned and ran, leaving Michael alone among the fallen cherry blossoms with the ruins of their perfect day scattered around him like broken dreams. Chapter 6, The Distance. 3 agonizing weeks had elapsed since Darcy fled from Michael's declaration of love among the cherry blossoms, and every single day had been exquisite torture. She'd avoided every location they had ever shared, the coffee shop, the bookstore, the farmer's market, even the art supply store where they'd reconnected. Instead, she haunted unfamiliar corners of the city, desperately trying to outrun the memory of devastation in his blue eyes when she'd told him she could never reciprocate his love. But running from Michael Quinn was like trying to outrun her own shadow. He was everywhere in her thoughts, in her dreams, in the ache that had taken up permanent residence in her chest. The worst part was that she knew she'd hurt him, deeply, cruelly, when all he'd done was offer her his heart with beautiful, terrifying honesty. She sat in her makeshift studio now, surrounded by canvases that told the story of her torment. Where once her paintings had been filled with light and hope, now they were dark, twisted things that seemed to pulse with her. Inner turmoil. Storms that never ended, flowers wilting in perpetual shadow, birds with broken wings that would never fly again. "Baby girl, you're killing yourself," her mother Grace said from the doorway, her voice heavy with worry. "You haven't eaten properly in days. You barely sleep, and these paintings—" She gestured at the dark canvases surrounding them. "These aren't you, Darcy. This isn't who you are." "Maybe it is," Darcy said quietly, not looking up from the canvas she was attacking with angry strokes of charcoal black. "Maybe this is who I've always been, and Michael just made me forget for a while." "That's Joseph talking, not you," Grace said firmly, entering the room and sitting on the paint-splattered stool beside her daughter's easel. "That man poisoned your mind against yourself, and now you're letting him win." Darcy finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights and tears she was tired of shedding. "What if I made the right choice, Mama? What if Michael is better off without me? I'm damaged goods. Why should I drag him down into my mess?" "Because love isn't about being perfect," Grace said softly. "It's about being real. And that man's love for you was the realest thing I've ever seen." Across town, Michael Quinn stood in his penthouse office, staring out at the city skyline with hollow eyes. His assistant had been tiptoeing around him for weeks, unsure how to handle her normally composed boss's obvious heartbreak. Board meetings were endured rather than led. Contracts were signed with mechanical precision, and the passion that had driven him to build his empire seemed to have evaporated entirely. "Sir?" His assistant Jennifer knocked softly on his office door. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review." "Leave them on my desk," Michael said without turning around. "I'll get to them later." Jennifer hesitated. "Sir, if you don't mind me saying, you look like you could use some fresh air. Maybe take a long weekend." Michael almost smiled at that. A long weekend wouldn't cure what ailed him. Only one thing could do that, and she'd made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him. But that didn't stop him from caring about her well-being, even from a distance. The private investigator he'd finally hired, not to stalk her but simply to ensure she was safe, had reported that she was staying close to home, avoiding her usual haunts, and according to the gallery owner Maria Santos, producing some of the darkest art of her career. That last piece of information had nearly brought Michael to his knees. He'd caused this. His declaration of love, his pushing for something she wasn't ready for, had sent her spiraling back into darkness. The thought that he'd contributed to her pain made him physically ill. So he'd done the only thing he could think of. He'd continued, supporting her from the shadows. Anonymous purchases of her new work at prices that would keep her financially stable. Payments to her parents' mortgage company that they would never be able to trace back to him. A donation to the children's art program at the community center where she'd mentioned wanting to volunteer, made in her grandmother's name. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was all he could do without violating her wishes for space. Meanwhile, Darcy's best friend, Angela Rodriguez, had finally had enough of watching her self-destruct. Angela was a force of nature, a successful lawyer with the kind of fierce loyalty that made her dangerous when someone she loved was hurting. She showed up at the Martin house on a grey Tuesday afternoon, armed with takeout from Darcy's favorite, a Thai restaurant and zero patience for self-pity. "Okay, that's it," Angela announced, barging into Darcy's studio and taking in the depressing artwork with sharp eyes. "We're having an intervention." "I don't need an intervention," Darcy protested, weakly, but Angela was already clearing space on the small table and unpacking containers of pad thai and green curry. "Yes, you do. Look at this place. It looks like depression took physical form and exploded all over your canvases." Angela shoved a container of food into Darcy's hands. "Eat and talk, in that order." For the first time in weeks, the smell Her food actually made Darcy's stomach growl with hunger rather than nausea. She took a tentative bite, then another, suddenly ravenous. "Good girl," Angela said approvingly. "Now talk. What the hell happened with Michael Quinn? Because one day you were glowing like a woman in love, and the next you've been hiding in here painting like you're auditioning for the role of tortured artist." Darcy nearly choked on her noodles. "I was not glowing like a woman in love. Please. Stevie Wonder could have seen how gone you were for that man. So what happened?" The whole story came pouring out. Michael's perfect picnic, his beautiful declaration of love, her panic-driven rejection, and the 3 weeks of regret that had followed. Angela listened without interruption, her expression growing more incredulous. With every word. "Let me get this straight," Angela said when Darcy finally finished. "A gorgeous, successful, genuinely good man told you he was desperately in love with you, and you ran away because... Why exactly?" "Because it's not real," Darcy cried, setting down her fork with shaking hands. "How can he love me when he doesn't?" "Really know me? What happens when he realizes I'm not worth all that devotion?" "Oh, honey," Angela said softly, her expression shifting from exasperation to pity. "Joseph really did a number on you, didn't he?" Fresh tears spilled down Darcy's cheeks. "He showed me the truth. That I'm not special, not worth protecting, not worth—" "Stop!" Angela's voice cut like a blade through Darcy's self-deprecation. "Joseph Mitchell is a worthless piece of trash who sold the most precious thing in his life for money. His opinion of your worth means exactly nothing. But what if he was right? What if I'm just fooling myself thinking someone like Michael could really love someone like me?" Angela was quiet for a long moment, studying her best friend with eyes that had seen her through everything from high school heartbreak to college struggles to career disappointments. "Darcy," she said finally, "I've known you for 15 years. In all that time, I've watched you love with your whole heart, even when it got you hurt. I've seen you give your last dollar to help someone in need. I've watched you spend hours teaching elderly people at the community center how to paint, just because it brought them joy." Darcy looked up, surprised by the fierce emotion in her friend's voice. "You are kind, talented, beautiful, and stronger than you know," Angela continued. "Any man would be lucky to earn your love. But Michael Quinn, that man saw all of that in you even when you were broken and bleeding in the rain. He didn't fall in love with some fantasy version of you. He fell in love with the real you, scars and all." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen the way he looks at you," Angela said simply. "Like you're the answer to every prayer he never knew he was praying. And more importantly, I've seen the way you look at him." Darcy's heart clenched painfully. "How do I look at him?" "Like you love him back," Angela said gently. "Like you're terrified of how much you love him back." That night, Darcy lay in her childhood bed staring at the ceiling, Angela's words echoing in her mind. Was it true? Did she love Michael Quinn? The thought terrified her, but as she traced back through every moment they'd shared, she couldn't deny the truth that had been growing in her heart. She loved the way he'd sat with her in the rain without asking for anything in return. She loved how he remembered small details about her preferences and dreams. She loved his gentle humor, his quiet strength, the way he talked about his mother with such tender reverence. She loved how safe she felt in his presence, how he made her want to be brave again. God help her, she was completely, desperately, hopelessly in love with Michael Quinn. The realization hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and sending her heart racing. She loved him, had probably loved him since that first night, when he'd wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and promised she was safe. But admitting it to herself was one thing. Finding the courage to do something about it was another entirely. What if it was too late? What if she'd hurt him too badly? What if he'd moved on and found someone else, someone whole and uncomplicated who could love him without fear? The thought of Michael with another woman made her feel physically ill. and she realized with crystalline clarity that she'd been protecting herself right into losing the best thing that had ever happened to her. As dawn broke over the city, Darcy made a decision that both terrified and exhilarated her. She was going to find Michael Quinn and tell him the truth, that she loved him, that she was sorry, and that she was finally ready to be brave enough to trust in their love. She just prayed it wasn't too late to undo the damage her fear had caused. Because losing Michael would be a tragedy, she wasn't sure she could survive twice. Chapter 7. Love's Second Chance. The Meridian Gallery's opening night represented the pinnacle of Darcy Martin's artistic career, yet she was absolutely terrified. Not because of the sophisticated crowd of art enthusiasts, critics, and potential collectors filling the elegant space, but because she sensed Michael Quinn's presence somewhere among them. She could feel his existence like electricity crackling in the air, making her skin tingle with awareness despite not having glimpsed him yet. Maria Santos, the gallery owner, had been mysteriously enthusiastic about this solo exhibition, insisting that Darcy's recent work deserved a grand showcase. What Maria hadn't mentioned, what Darcy was only now beginning to suspect, was that someone had been pulling strings behind the scenes to make this night possible. "You look absolutely radiant, Mija," Maria said, appearing at Darcy's elbow, with a glass of champagne. "That dress is perfect." Darcy smoothed her hands over the midnight blue silk dress she'd chosen with trembling fingers that morning. It was elegant and sophisticated, with a flowing skirt that made her feel like she was floating, and a neckline that was modest but flattering. She'd left her hair in its natural curls, and the only jewelry she wore was her grandmother's gold necklace and the small diamond earrings her parents had given her for her 21st birthday. "I can't drink," Darcy said, pushing the champagne away with shaking hands. "I'm too nervous." "Maria, are you sure people will actually buy these paintings? Some of them are so dark. Art comes from the soul, sweetheart. People connect with honesty, even when it's painful." Maria's eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief. "Besides, I have a feeling tonight is going to be full of surprises." The gallery was packed with Dallas's art elite, their conversations creating a sophisticated hum that mixed with the soft jazz playing in the background. Darcy moved through the crowd like a ghost, accepting congratulations and compliments with gracious smiles, while her eyes searched desperately for one familiar face. Her paintings lined the walls in chronological order, telling the story of her journey from betrayal to healing to hope. The earlier pieces, the ones she'd painted during her darkest period after Michael's declaration, were studies in pain and shadow. But as the exhibition progressed, light began to creep back into her work, culminating in the three newest pieces that had been completed just days before the opening. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a painting she'd titled Storm's Promise, a massive canvas depicting a figure standing in rainfall with arms outstretched, face turned toward the heavens. But unlike her earlier rain paintings that spoke of despair, this one radiated hope. The tempest was breaking, golden light was beginning to pierce the clouds, and the figure appeared to be dancing with joy rather than drowning in sorrow. "It's extraordinary," a familiar voice said behind her, and Darcy's heart stopped completely. She turned slowly, and there he was, Michael Quinn, looking devastatingly handsome in a midnight black tuxedo that made his blue eyes appear even more intense. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he was clean-shaven except for the slight shadow along his strong jaw that made her fingers itch to touch him. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. They looked at her with the same wonder and tenderness. She remembered, but there was something else there now, a wariness that hadn't been there before, a careful distance that made her heart clench with regret. "Michael," she whispered, his name falling from her lips like a prayer. "Hello, Darcy." His voice was polite, controlled, giving nothing away. "Congratulations on the exhibition. Your work it's incredible. You've grown so much as an artist." The bad, formal politeness in his tone was worse than anger would have been. This was what she'd done to them, turned the man who'd once looked at her like she hung the stars into a stranger who spoke to her like a distant acquaintance. "Thank you," she managed, wrapping her arms around herself in a gesture that had become habitual when she felt vulnerable. I didn't know if you'd come." "I almost didn't," Michael admitted, his gaze flickering away from her face to focus on the painting behind her. "But I couldn't stay away. Your art has always been important to me." The careful way he said "your" art instead of "you" felt like a knife through her chest, but she deserved it. She'd thrown his love back in his face, told him it wasn't real, accused him of only wanting her out of pity. Of course he'd protect himself now. "Michael, she started, but was interrupted by an elegant woman in her 50s approaching with a warm smile. "Ms. Martin, I'm Catherine Whitmore from the Dallas Contemporary Arts Review. I was hoping I could get a few minutes to discuss your work for our next feature article." Darcy wanted to scream. This was her chance to talk to Michael, to begin to repair the damage she'd done, and she was being pulled away for interviews and photographs. But this was also her career, her future, and she couldn't afford to alienate the press. "Of course," she said with a smile she didn't feel. She glanced back at Michael, hoping he'd wait, but he was already moving away, blending back into the crowd like he'd never been there at all. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of conversations with collectors, interviews with journalists, and the surreal experience of watching red dots appear next to her paintings as they sold. By the time the crowd began to thin, nearly every piece in the exhibition had been purchased at prices that made her head spin. "Who bought them?" she asked Maria as they watched the last few guests filter toward the exit. "The collectors, I mean. Some of these prices are astronomical." Maria's smile was mysterious. "Various collectors. Some prefer to remain anonymous." She paused, studying Darcy's face. "But I will say this. Someone in particular made sure that your most personal pieces, the ones that tell your story most clearly, went to buyers who will treasure them appropriately." Before Darcy could ask what that meant, she spotted Michael near the gallery's entrance, clearly preparing to leave. Panic seized her chest. She couldn't let him walk away again, not when she'd finally found the courage to fight for what they'd lost. "Excuse me," she said to Maria, gathering up her flowing skirt and hurrying across the gallery floor. "Michael, wait!" she called out, her heels clicking against the polished concrete. He stopped, his hand on the glass door, but didn't turn around immediately. When he finally faced her, his expression was carefully neutral. "What is it, Darcy? Don't leave, please. We need to talk." "I think we said everything we needed to say in the gardens," Michael replied quietly. "You made your feelings very clear." "No, I didn't." The words tumbled out of her in a rush. "I was scared and stupid, and I said terrible things that weren't true. But my feelings, Michael, I never told you my real feelings." Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe. Or just curiosity. "What are you saying?" Darcy glanced around the gallery, suddenly aware that they weren't alone. Maria and a few staff members were still cleaning up, and the last few guests were lingering near the wine table. "Not here," she said desperately. "Can we go somewhere private, please?" Michael hesitated for so long that she thought he might refuse. Finally, he nodded toward the exit. "There's a small park across the street. We can talk there." The park was intimate and peaceful, with wrought-iron benches placed beneath old oak trees strung with fairy lights. The sounds of the city felt distant here, muffled by the rustling leaves and the gentle splash of a small fountain. They sat on a bench facing each other, the space between them feeling like an ocean. "You wanted to talk," Michael said quietly. "I'm listening." Darcy took a shaking breath, gathering every ounce of courage she possessed. This was it. Her chance to tell him the truth, to bare her soul the way he'd bared his in the cherry blossom garden. "I lied to you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "That day in the gardens when I said I couldn't love you, when I said it wasn't real. I lied about all of it." Michael's eyes sharpened, but he didn't speak, just waited for her to continue. "The truth is, I was already falling in love with you. Maybe I started falling that first night in the rain. Or maybe it was when you bought canvases you didn't need just to see me. Or maybe it was when you told me about your mother, and I saw how gentle your heart really is." Tears began to slip down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. "I was terrified, Michael. Terrified of trusting again, terrified of being vulnerable, terrified of giving someone the power to destroy me the way Joseph did." "Darcy." Michael's voice was rough with emotion, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Please, let me finish. I need to say this." She twisted her hands in her lap, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I convinced myself that your feelings weren't real because it was easier than believing I deserved them. I told myself you only wanted to save me because that felt safer than accepting that someone could love me for who I really am. But you were wrong," Michael said softly. "It wasn't a question. I was so wrong." Fresh tears spilled over as she finally spoke the words that had been burning in her chest for weeks. "I love you, Michael. I love you so much. It terrifies me and thrills me and makes me want to be braver than I've ever been. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see beauty in broken things. I love how you make me feel safe and cherished and worthy of good things." Michael was very still, his blue eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her heart race. "I love you," she repeated, her voice stronger now. "And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for hurting you, for lying to you, for throwing your beautiful love back in your face when it was the most precious gift anyone had ever given me." The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of her ragged breathing and the distant music from a restaurant down the street. Michael's face was unreadable, and Darcy felt her heart beginning to break all over again. Then, slowly, he reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "Do you mean it?" he asked, his voice hoarse with hope and vulnerability. "Do you really love me, or are you just scared of being alone?" "I mean it," she whispered, covering his hands with hers. "I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. You're not my refuge from loneliness, Michael. You're my home." And then he was kissing her, soft and desperate and full of all the love they'd both been holding back. Darcy melted into him, her hands fisting in his tuxedo jacket as she kissed him back with everything she had. It was their first real kiss, and it tasted like forgiveness and promise and the beginning of forever. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Michael rested his forehead against hers. "I never stopped loving you," he confessed. "Not for a single day, even when it hurt, even when I thought you were lost to me forever. I couldn't stop." "I'm not lost anymore," Darcy whispered against his lips. "I'm found. We're found." Chapter 8. When Love Feels Impossible. 2 blissful months had passed since that magical night in the park, when Darcy had finally discovered the courage to confess her love to Michael, and they had been the most beautiful months of her existence. Their love had flourished like flowers. After an endless winter, tentative initially, then bold and vibrant and absolutely breathtaking, Michael courted her like a man who understood that trust was earned in moments but built over time. He brought her coffee every morning, learned her favorite poets so he could quote them in handwritten notes, and held her hand through thunderstorms because he remembered how much the rain used to frighten her. They spent hours talking about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears and the 1,000 small intimacies that weave 2 hearts together. But tonight was different. Tonight, the doubts that had been whispering in the shadows of Darcy's mind were threatening to become a roar that drowned out everything else. She stood in her parents' living room, smoothing her hands over the emerald green dress she'd chosen for Sunday dinner, trying to calm the anxiety that made her stomach churn. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," her mother Grace said, adjusting the collar of her own best dress. "That color makes your skin absolutely glow." "Michael's a lucky man," her father Robert added, straightening his tie with the careful precision of someone who rarely wore formal clothes. "I hope he knows what a treasure he's getting." Darcy managed a weak smile. "What if this is a mistake? What if we're moving too fast? What if his family—" "Baby girl," Grace interrupted gently, taking her daughter's hands in her worn ones. "Stop borrowing trouble. Michael loves you. Anyone with eyes can see that." "But his world is so different from ours," Darcy said, voicing the fear that had been growing stronger each day. "His penthouse, his cars, the way people defer to him everywhere we go. What if his family takes one look at us and decides I'm not good enough for him?" Robert's weathered face hardened slightly. "Any family that would judge you by your bank account instead of your character isn't worth worrying about. And if Quinn is half the man I think he is, he'll make that clear to them." The doorbell rang, and Darcy's heart jumped into her throat. Michael was early, probably because he was as nervous about this dinner as she was. They'd been taking things slow, but she could feel the weight of unspoken expectations growing between them. The way he looked at her sometimes, like he was imagining a future she wasn't sure she was brave enough to embrace. "I'll get it," she said, smoothing her dress one more time before walking to the front door. Michael stood on her parents' modest front porch, looking absolutely devastating in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than her father made in a month. But it wasn't his expensive clothes that made her breath catch. It was the nervous hope in his blue eyes and the small bouquet of yellow roses in his hands. "For your mother," he said, offering her the flowers with a smile that was equal parts confident and uncertain. "And these are for you." He produced a single white rose from behind his back, and Darcy felt tears prick her eyes. He remembered everything. How yellow roses were her mother's favorites, how white roses had been her grandmother's signature flower. "They're perfect," she whispered, accepting the rose and breathing in its delicate fragrance. "You're perfect." "Hardly," Michael said with a self-deprecating laugh. "I'm terrified your father is going to interrogate me about my intentions." "Are your intentions honorable?" Darcy asked teasingly, but there was real curiosity beneath the light question. Michael's expression grew serious, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Completely honorable," he said quietly, "and completely serious." Before she could ask what he meant by that, her parents appeared in the hallway behind her. Grace took one look at the flowers in Michael's hands and broke into a radiant smile. "Michael, you didn't need to bring anything, but thank you. These are gorgeous." "It's the least I could do, Mrs. Martin. Thank you for inviting me into your home." Dinner was a revelation in awkwardness disguised as politeness. Grace had cooked enough food for an army, her famous pot roast with all the fixings, cornbread that melted in your mouth, and a peach cobbler that could make grown men weep. Michael praised everything enthusiastically and genuinely, asking for recipes and second helpings with the kind of sincere appreciation that slowly melted Grace's maternal heart. But Robert was a harder sell. Darcy's father was a man of few words and strong convictions, and she could see him studying Michael with the suspicious eye of a man who'd watched his daughter's heart get broken before. "So, Michael," Robert said during a lull in conversation, his deep voice carrying the weight of paternal authority, "what exactly are your intentions with my daughter?" "Daddy," Darcy said quickly, embarrassment flooding her cheeks. "You don't need to. It's okay." Michael interrupted gently, setting down his fork and meeting Robert's steady gaze without flinching. "It's a fair question, sir. I love your daughter, more than I knew it was possible to love someone. My intention is to spend the rest of my life proving to her that she's the most precious thing in my world." The simple honesty in his voice made Grace reach for her napkin to dab at sudden tears, but Robert's expression remained skeptical. "Love is easy to say when everything's going well," Robert said quietly. "But what happens when times get hard, when the novelty wears off? When you realize that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you have to make every single day?" "Then I'll choose her every day," Michael replied without hesitation. "In good times and bad, when she's happy and when she's hurting, when she's confident and when she's doubting herself, I'll choose her every single time, even when your family and friends think you could do better." Robert pressed, and Darcy felt her heart sink. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My family's opinion doesn't determine my choices, Mr. Martin. Darcy is not someone I'm settling for. She's someone I'm grateful every day to have found. Anyone who can't see that isn't someone whose opinion matters to me." After dinner, Michael insisted on helping with the dishes, despite Grace's protests. Darcy watched him roll up his sleeves and chat easily with her mother about everything from cooking techniques to her nursing career, and she felt her heart swell with love and pride. He fit here, in her parents' small kitchen with its mismatched chairs and faded wallpaper. He made himself at home without taking over, contributed without condescending. But the doubts were still there, whispering cruel possibilities in her ear. What would happen when they left this safe bubble and returned to his world? How long before the differences between their backgrounds became impossible to ignore? Later, they sat on the front porch swing while her parents tactfully retreated inside to give them privacy. The night was warm and clear, with a canopy of stars visible despite the city lights. Michael's arm was around her shoulders, and she was curled against his side, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Your parents are wonderful," Michael said softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I can see where you get your strength and your kindness." "Daddy's worried about the differences between us," Darcy said quietly. "Our backgrounds, our worlds. He thinks it will become a problem eventually." "Do you?" Michael asked, and she could hear the vulnerability beneath the casual question. Darcy was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, I wonder if I'll ever fit into your life completely. When we're together like this, it feels perfect. But when I see you in your element, at business dinners, charity galas, with people who've known you forever, sometimes I feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life." Michael pulled back to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the porch light. "Darcy, you don't need to fit into my life. You are my life. Everything else is just background noise. But what about your family, your friends, the people in your business world who expect you to be with someone from your own social circle?" "I don't care what they expect," Michael said firmly. "The only person whose opinion matters to me is yours. And if anyone in my life can't accept the woman I love, then they don't deserve to be in my life." The conviction in his voice made her heart race, and she realized he was reaching into his jacket pocket with slightly trembling fingers. When his hand emerged, it held a small velvet box that made her breath catch in her throat. "Michael," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I know it's only been 2 months since we found our way back to each other," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "but I've loved you for much longer than that. I've loved you since the night I found you in the rain, and I'll love you until my last breath." He slid off the swing and onto one knee, opening the box to reveal the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen. It was vintage and elegant, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the porch light and threw rainbows. Across the wooden floor, "This ring belonged to my grandmother," Michael said, his gaze never wavering from hers. "She wore it for 63 years of marriage to a man who loved her completely, despite their vastly different backgrounds. She made me promise to only give it to someone who would treasure it as much as she did, someone who understood that genuine love transcends all obstacles. Tears were streaming down Darcy's face now, but she couldn't find her voice to speak. "Darcy Martin," Michael continued, his voice breaking with emotion, "you are my heart, my soul, my reason for everything. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you the way you deserve to be loved?" The ring was perfect. He was perfect. This moment was perfect. And that's exactly what terrified her. How could something this beautiful, this right, possibly last? How could she say yes when her parents' doubts echoed her own deepest fears? "Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible through her tears. "I love you so much it terrifies me, but I don't know if I'm brave enough for this. What if we're too different? What if your world never accepts me? What if I disappoint you?" The hope in Michael's eyes dimmed slightly, but he didn't lower the ring. "What if none of that matters? What if love is enough?" "I want to believe that," she sobbed. "I want to believe it so badly. But I'm scared, Michael. I'm scared of losing myself in your world, and I'm scared of holding you back from the life you're supposed to have." "The life I'm supposed to have is the one I choose," Michael said quietly. "And I choose you. I will always choose you." But even as he spoke those beautiful words, Darcy could hear her father's voice echoing in her mind. What happens when times get hard? When you realize that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you have to make every single day. "I need time," she whispered, hating herself for the words, even as they left her lips. "I'm sorry, Michael, but I need time to think." The devastation that flashed across his face was almost unbearable, but he nodded slowly and rose to his feet. With hands that shook only slightly, he closed the ring box and slipped it into her palm. "Keep it," he said quietly. "Whether you marry me or not, it belongs to you now. My grandmother would have wanted you to have it." As he walked away into the darkness, leaving her alone on the porch with his grandmother's ring clutched in her trembling hands, Darcy wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. But the fear was stronger than the regret, and she couldn't bring herself to call him back. Some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. She just prayed this wasn't one of them. Chapter 9. The Revelation. 3 torturous weeks had elapsed since Michael's proposal, and Darcy Martin felt as though she was slowly dying from within. She carried his grandmother's emerald ring in her pocket constantly, its weight serving as a perpetual reminder of the love she was too frightened to embrace. Her parents had been walking on eggshells around her, and her mother's disappointed. Sighs were becoming increasingly difficult to endure with each passing day. The worst part was the silence. Michael had respected her request for space with the same devastating thoroughness he brought to everything else. No calls, no texts, no surprise encounters at their old haunts. It was as if he'd vanished from her life completely, taking all the light and warmth with him. She was sitting in her makeshift studio, staring at a blank canvas she'd been unable to touch for days, when the doorbell rang with an urgency that made her heart jump. Her parents weren't home. They'd gone to visit her aunt for the weekend, so she reluctantly made her way to the front door. The last person she expected to see was Joseph Mitchell. He stood on her doorstep looking like a shadow of his former self. His expensive clothes were wrinkled and ill-fitting, his hair was disheveled, and there was a desperate, haunted look in his eyes that made her take an instinctive step backward. "Darcy," he said, his voice hoarse and pleading, "thank God. I've been trying to find you for weeks." "What are you doing here, Joseph?" she asked, her hand tightening on the doorframe. "How did you find me?" "I never stopped loving you," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know I made mistakes, terrible, unforgivable mistakes, but I've changed. I've lost everything, Darcy. my business, my reputation, my self-respect. You're all I have left." Darcy felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the smooth, confident man who had once swept her off her feet. This was someone broken and dangerous, someone with nothing left to lose. "You need to leave," she said firmly, starting to close the door. "We have nothing to say to each other." Joseph's hand shot out, pressing against the door to prevent her from closing it. "Please, just listen to me. 5 minutes, that's all I'm requesting." "I said no, Joseph. Release the door." But instead of complying, he pushed harder, forcing his way into her parents' house. "You don't understand. That Quinn bastard, he's been using you. He's been playing some sick game, making you think he cares about you when all he wants is to add another conquest to his collection." "Get out," Darcy said, backing toward the kitchen where she could reach the phone. "Get out of my house right now, or I'm calling the police." "He bought your paintings, Darcy," Joseph shouted, his composure finally cracking completely. "All of them. He's the anonymous collector who's been throwing money at your art. It's all been a lie, a elaborate setup to make you feel special, to make you think you're worth something." The words hit her like physical blows, each one designed to find and tear at her deepest insecurities. "You're lying." "Am I?" Joseph laughed bitterly, pulling out his phone. "I hired a private investigator to look into his finances. Quinn Industries has been funneling money to galleries, art dealers, even your parents' mortgage company. He's been controlling your entire life from behind the scenes, pulling strings like you're his personal puppet." He shoved the phone at her, showing her financial records and bank transfers that made her stomach turn. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars traced back to Michael's various business accounts. "He's been manipulating you from the beginning," Joseph continued, pressing his advantage as he saw the doubt creeping into her eyes. "The chance encounters, the romantic gestures, even that proposal. It's all been carefully orchestrated. You're not his girlfriend, Darcy. You're his charity case." "Stop," she whispered. But the damage was already done. Every insecurity she'd ever had about Michael's world, every fear about not being worthy of his love, came rushing back with devastating force. "Come back to me," Joseph said, his voice taking on the manipulative tone she remembered too well. "I made mistakes, but at least I was honest about what I wanted. At least with me, you knew where you stood. This Quinn guy, he's just playing with you because he's bored. Rich men like him don't marry women like us, Darcy. They use us and throw us away when something better comes along." "Get out," Darcy said again, but her voice lacked conviction. The evidence on his phone, combined with her own deepest fears, was creating a perfect storm of doubt in her mind. "I'll give you time to think about it," Joseph said, apparently satisfied that he'd planted the seeds of destruction he'd come to sow. "But don't wait too long. Men like Quinn have short attention spans. He'll move on to his next project soon enough, and then where will you be?" After he left, Darcy sank onto her living room couch, staring at the financial documents he'd left behind. The numbers didn't lie. Michael had been supporting her secretly for months, paying for things she'd never asked him to pay for, manipulating her circumstances in ways she'd never suspected. But why? Was Joseph right? Was this all just an elaborate game to Michael, a way to feel powerful and magnanimous? Had she been fooling herself into believing that someone like him could genuinely love someone like her? She pulled the emerald ring from her pocket, studying it through tears that blurred her vision. It was beautiful, too beautiful for someone like her to wear. Maybe that should have been her first clue that this was all too good to be true. Her phone rang, startling her from her spiral of self-doubt. The caller ID showed Michael's name, and for a moment she considered not answering. But she needed to hear his voice, needed to give him a chance to explain before she made any decisions. She couldn't take back. "Hello?" she said, proud that her voice came out steady. "Darcy." The relief in Michael's voice was palpable. "I know you asked for space, but I couldn't help myself. I miss you so much, it's killing me. How are you? I'm... She paused, looking at the financial documents spread across her coffee table. Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, anything. Have you been paying for things without telling me? My art sales, my parents' mortgage, other expenses. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that she thought the call had been dropped. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was quiet and careful. Yes, he said simply. The admission hit her like a physical blow, even though she'd been expecting it. Why? Because I love you, Michael said, his voice raw with emotion. Because I wanted to take care of you, to make sure you never had to worry about money while you were healing. Because I could afford to help, and it killed me to think of you struggling when I had the power to fix it. So Joseph was right, Darcy said, her voice barely above a whisper. This has all been about you trying to save me. I'm just your charity case, your pet project. What? No. Michael's voice was sharp with panic. Darcy, that's not... Who told you that? Was it Joseph? Did he contact you? The fact that he immediately suspected Joseph should have been telling, but Darcy was too hurt to see clearly. It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that it's true. You've been controlling my life, manipulating my circumstances to make me dependent on you. That's not what I was doing, Michael said desperately. I was trying to help, to support you while you found your footing again. I never wanted you to be dependent. I wanted you to be free to choose me because you wanted to, not because you needed to. But I can't choose you freely when I don't even know what's real, Darcy cried, her careful composure finally cracking. How much of our relationship has been genuine, and how much has been orchestrated by your money and influence? Everything between us has been real, Michael said fiercely. My feelings, your feelings, every moment we've shared, none of that was bought or manipulated. The money was just me trying to clear away the obstacles so we could focus on what mattered. What mattered to you, Darcy corrected bitterly. You decided what I needed, what was best for me, without ever asking what I wanted. How is that different from what Joseph did? Because I never asked for anything in return. Michael's voice broke with frustration and pain. I didn't want to own you or control you. I wanted to love you freely, without the complications of financial stress or practical concerns getting in the way. But that wasn't your choice to make, Darcy said, tears streaming down her face. Don't you see? By taking away my agency, by making decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent, you treated me exactly like Joseph did, like something to be managed rather than someone to be trusted. The silence that followed was deafening. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was broken and defeated. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you, but I can see now that I was trying to fix everything because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. But you did lose me, Darcy said quietly. The moment you decided I couldn't handle my own life, you lost me. She hung up the phone and sat in the silence of her parents' house, surrounded by the evidence of Michael's deception and her own shattered dreams. Outside, a storm was building, and she could hear the first drops of rain beginning to fall against the windows. For the first time since that horrible night at the hotel, Darcy felt truly alone. But this time, it wasn't Joseph's betrayal that had broken her heart. It was the realization that even the most beautiful love could be poisoned by the very attempts to protect it. The emerald ring lay on the coffee table beside the financial documents, catching the lamplight like captured tears. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out how to return it and say goodbye to the only man she'd ever truly loved. Tonight, she would simply mourn the death of a dream that had never really had a chance to live. Chapter 10. Love's Perfect Victory. Darcy couldn't sleep that night. She remained by her bedroom window, watching the storm rage outside while her own heart was being torn apart by conflicting emotions. The emerald ring sat on her nightstand, catching flashes of lightning like captured fire, and every time she looked at it, her chest ached with pain, so profound it felt like drowning. By morning, the storm had passed, but the devastation in her soul remained. Her parents found her still sitting by the window when they returned from their weekend trip, still wearing yesterday's clothes and clutching Michael's business card in her trembling hands. "Baby girl, what happened?" Grace asked, rushing to her daughter's side. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The whole story came pouring out. Joseph's visit, his revelations about Michael's financial manipulations, the phone call that had shattered her heart all over again. Her parents listened in silence, their expressions growing more concerned. With every word, "So you see," Darcy finished, her voice hoarse from crying, "it was all a lie. Everything I thought was real between us was just him trying to fix me like I was some broken thing he could repair with enough money." Robert, who had been quiet throughout her tale, finally spoke. "Darcy, can I ask you something?" She nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue her mother had pressed into her hands. "Do you think Michael Quinn is the kind of man who would spend months orchestrating an elaborate deception just for the thrill of manipulating someone?" I don't know anymore," she whispered. "Yes, you do," Robert said firmly. "In your heart, you know exactly what kind of man he is. The question is whether you're going to let Joseph Mitchell's poison destroy the best thing that ever happened to you." "Daddy, you don't understand. Michael lied to me. He controlled my life without my permission." "He helped you," Grace interrupted gently. "There's a difference, sweetheart. A big one." "Is there?" Darcy asked desperately. "How can I trust someone who makes decisions about my life behind my back?" Robert stood up and walked to the window, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. "Your mother and I have been married for 35 years, he said quietly. "In all that time, do you know how many times one of us has done something for the other without asking permission first?" Darcy shook her head. "Hundreds, maybe thousands." He turned to face her, his eyes gentle but serious. "When your mama was going through nursing school and we were barely scraping by, I took a second job without telling her because I didn't want her to worry about money while she was studying. When I hurt my back and couldn't work for 3 months, she picked up extra shifts and sold her grandmother's jewelry to keep us afloat, and she never said a word about it until years later." "That's different," Darcy protested. "You were married. You were a team." "Were we?" Robert asked. "Or were we just two people who loved each other so much that we'd do anything to protect each other, even if it meant making decisions the other person might not approve of?" Grace moved to stand beside her husband, slipping her hand into his. "Love isn't a democracy, sweetheart. Sometimes love means making hard choices for the people we care about, even when they might not understand or appreciate it at the time." "But how do I know the difference between love and manipulation?" Darcy asked, her voice breaking. "Look at the motivation," Grace said simply. "Joseph wanted to use you for his own benefit. Michael wanted to help you succeed on your own terms. One was selfish, the other was selfless. The fact that you can't see the difference tells me that boy did more damage to your self-worth than we realized." Before Darcy could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Angela's name, and she answered with a shaking hand. "Darcy, thank God." Angela's voice was tight with urgency. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. Something's happened." "What do you mean?" "It's Michael. He's in the hospital." The world tilted violently around Darcy. What? What happened?" "Car accident last night during the storm. He's alive, but it's serious. He's been asking for you, Darcy. The doctors say he keeps repeating your name." The phone slipped from Darcy's, numb fingers clattering to the floor. Her parents' voices seemed to come from very far away as they asked what was wrong, what had happened. But all she could think about was Michael lying in a hospital bed, hurt and alone, calling her name. "I have to go to him," she whispered, the realization hitting her like lightning. "Oh God, what if he dies thinking I hate him? What if I never get the chance to tell him?" "Tell him what, baby girl?" Grace asked gently. "That I love him," Darcy sobbed. "That I love him more than my fear, more than my pride, more than my need to be right. That he's the best thing that ever happened to me, and I've been too stupid and scared to see it." 20 minutes later, Darcy was racing through the corridors of Dallas Presbyterian Hospital, still wearing yesterday's clothes, with Michael's engagement ring clutched in her fist. Angela met her at the elevator, her usually immaculate appearance, disheveled with worry. "He's stable," Angela said quickly, seeing the panic in Darcy's eyes. "But he has a concussion and some broken ribs. The doctors say he's been drifting in and out of consciousness. Can I see him?" Room 314. "But Darcy?" Angela caught her arm as she started toward the stairs. "His family is here. His uncle, some cousins, business associates. They've been asking questions about who you are." Darcy's steps faltered. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that make it clear they don't think you belong in his life," Angela said bluntly. "But Michael's been fighting them every time he's conscious. He told his uncle that if they couldn't accept you, they weren't welcome in his room." Something fierce and protective rose up in Darcy's chest. Michael was fighting for her, for them, even while lying broken in a hospital bed. The least she could do was fight back. Room 314 was crowded with well-dressed people who all turned to stare when Darcy appeared in the doorway. She ignored them completely, her eyes going straight to the man lying pale and still in the hospital bed. Michael looked fragile in a way that made her heart clench with terror. His dark hair was matted with dried blood. There were stitches along. His forehead and his breathing was shallow and labored, but his eyes were open, and when he saw her, his face transformed with such joy and relief that it took her breath away. "Darcy," he whispered, his voice rough and weak. "You came." She crossed to his bedside without acknowledging anyone else in the room, taking his hand in both of hers. His skin was cold, and his fingers were wrapped in bandages. But his grip was surprisingly strong. "Of course I came," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Did you really think I wouldn't? After yesterday, I thought you might hate me." "I could never hate you," she whispered, leaning down to press her forehead against his. "I was hurt and scared and confused, but I could never hate you." "Excuse me," a cold voice interrupted from behind her. "But who exactly are you?" Darcy turned to see a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit looking at her with undisguised disdain. This had to be Michael's uncle. She could see the family resemblance in the sharp cheekbones and blue eyes, though his held none of Michael's warmth. "I'm Darcy Martin," she said, straightening to her full height. "I'm the woman Michael asked to marry him." "The artist," the man said, his tone making it sound like a disease. "Yes, I've heard about you. Michael's little project." "She's not a project," Michael said firmly from the bed, his voice gaining strength from anger. "She's the woman I love. And if you can't treat her with respect, Uncle Richard, you can leave." "Michael, be reasonable," Richard said, his voice taking on a placating tone. "You've been through a trauma. You're not thinking clearly. This girl is obviously after your money." "This girl," Darcy interrupted, her voice cutting through the room like a blade, "is standing right here, and she doesn't want or need Michael's money." She pulled the emerald ring from her pocket and held it up so everyone in the room could see it. "Do you know what this is? It's his grandmother's engagement ring. He offered it to me 3 weeks ago, and I said no because I was scared of not being good enough for him. But I was wrong." She turned back to Michael, whose eyes were wide with hope and love and desperate longing. "I'm not scared anymore," she said, her voice strong and clear. "I'm not scared of your money or your world or the people who think I don't belong here, because I know who I am, and I know who you are, and I know what we have together is real." With shaking hands, She slipped the ring onto her left hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Michael Quinn," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I love you. I love your generous heart and your gentle strength and the way you see beauty in broken things. I love how you make me feel safe and cherished and worthy of good things. I don't care if your family disapproves. I don't care if your friends think I'm not sophisticated enough, and I don't care if the whole world thinks we don't make sense together." She leaned down and kissed him softly, tasting salt from both their tears. "I choose you," she whispered against his lips. "I choose us. If the offer still stands, yes, yes, I'll marry you." Michael's smile was brighter than the sun streaming through the hospital window. "The offer will always stand," he said hoarsely. "Forever and always, the offer stands." The room erupted in shocked murmurs and whispered conversations, but Darcy didn't care. She had found her courage at last, and nothing, not disapproving relatives, not social pressure, not her own lingering fears, was going to take it away from her again. 6 months later, they exchanged vows in her parents' backyard, beneath a canopy of white roses and fairy lights. Grace wept throughout the entire ceremony. Robert escorted Darcy down a makeshift aisle with tears in his eyes, and Michael gazed at his bride as though she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever uttered. Richard Quinn and several other family members had chosen not to attend, but their absence only made the celebration sweeter. The people who truly mattered were there, chosen family who loved them for who they were, not what they represented. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife to a song that spoke of love that overcomes all obstacles, Darcy looked up into Michael's eyes and saw their future reflected there, not perfect, but real and beautiful, and worth every moment of fear they'd had to overcome to find each other. "No regrets?" Michael asked softly, spinning her gently. "Under the starlit sky, only one," Darcy replied, her eyes sparkling with mischief and love. "What's that? That it took me so long to say yes to forever with you." Michael's laugh was pure joy as he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them giddy with happiness and the promise of all the tomorrows stretching out before them. They had found their way through the storm to the sunshine on the other side, and their love story was just beginning.